see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, we're back at you with part 2 of the West Indian magic. We got the same crew that we had earlier in part 1. We got Lisa, the Occult Reject Mad Scientist. What's up, Lisa? Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm excited to be here.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely an interesting topic, and again, not one that I know much about. So, was there anything that you would like to plug? Or got anything to say?
Sure. Check us out at occultresearchinstitute.org. Got many great contributors that contribute literary work to that website. Check us out there, occultresearchinstitute.org.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we got Jin the Ninja with us again. Jin, what is up, my man? Please let everybody know what your deal is for people who may not know who you are yet.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Absadarian. I highly recommend people to check out part 1 from the bit I was able to hear of it. It was actually a really good episode. So thank you, Nick, for hosting my crazy ideas. And so you can check me out at Threshold Saints on X, and also my personal account at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn, and on Instagram at Threshold Saints. And the link tree will be in the show notes, as it always is. So check me out there, and thank you guys so much.
Awesome. And yes, thank you very much, Jin, for joining us, and thank you very much for the topic. And finally to the guest, Absadarian. Welcome, sir. Thank you very much again for joining us. I always appreciate your input and your stuff that you bring to the show. Please let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find you.
Thank you. And thanks again, everyone, for having me back on. It's a pleasure. So you could find me on Linktree at Absadarian. I do a lot of esoteric research. I'm most active on Facebook, Patreon, and Gab, but I'm also on IG and a little bit of Twitter. Yeah, we got a lot to cover today. We'll talk more about Trinidad, some of the traditions going on in Trinidad, and being that it's West Indian magic, also wanted to talk about a little bit of some of the other islands, what they're involved with, some of the correspondence, and look at some things happening today with some of these esoteric traditions, and look at some not too well-known connections with West Indian magic in the Western magic tradition.
I don't know where you want to start, but I mean, full is yours, I guess, for right now.
Sure. So last time I really didn't get to talk about the Kali tradition, but the Kali tradition is really popular in the West Indies, especially Trinidad, Guyana, and the Guyanese in general, like Suriname. But yeah, I have, in my family, there's pujaris and people, relatives that are into following Kali and Kali worship. And, my dad has told me so many interesting stories about, Kali, which is such a misunderstood deity, goddess. And there's not much known about her. Just from writing, she's one of the Vidyas, which is the 10 goddesses in the tantric tradition. She's usually the primary. She starts at number 1, and so the other forms of the Mahavidyas are also aspects of Kali or Durga. That's some of the darker aspects. But yeah, so I'll share one story my dad told me. My dad's uncle was a pujari was a Kali devotee, Sada, as best as I understand. Sada, again, for the listeners who missed part 1, Sada worship. There's 2 types of worship in the tradition. It's white magic or black magic, but the white magic tradition is Sada, which means no blood. So it's you're not offering any life or anything like that. That is not as popular as the Black Tantra section.
It's not as fun.
which does. Yeah. So the Black Tantra is much more popular because people want to get rich. They want to be, they want to be powerful.
They want that
And let me
edge.
tell you, say that again.
They want the edge. That edge lord feel.
They want to cross the abyss, and they want that edge. So the Black Tantra is really, really popular. And I just want to jump to the States. In New York, there's a big West Indian community, and some of the businesses, they're owned by Trinidadian or Guyanese people, and they're super successful. And if you go in the store, it's like usually a roti shop. Roti shop is like a restaurant that serves really good West Indian food. And so you'll see a picture of the Devi, the goddess, and this is a common theme. So a lot of the roti shops and the most successful business owners, by the way, they participate in Kali worship, and they do offerings. I've had a cousin who worked in a roti shop, and she said, for some reason, every year some worker gets hurt or injured, right? And she's like, I know the owner, he's into like black magic and stuff, so maybe there's something related there that he's offering some someone gets cut or some blood or injury every year, and that's really popular. But back to Trinidad, that's also very popular. And back to the story with my dad's uncle. So my dad's uncle was a pujari with he had his own Kali temple and everything. And my dad's cousin was a female. She committed suicide over a boy, right? It just didn't work out. The parents weren't okay with the relationship. And in Trinidad, a common thing back in the day was, if you're going to commit suicide, it was with Gramazone. So you're drinking, I forgot what it is, but basically it's poison, right? So my dad's cousin committed suicide, and my dad's uncle is distraught, and he's at and my dad went to console him, and he was just there, in the temple by himself. He was very sad and distraught, obviously. And he said he looked at the watch. He's like, all right. He said to my dad, hey, just wait right here. I'll be right back. I just have to go make an offering and speak to Kali. So my dad's just minding his business in the yard, and no one else is in the estate or the temple. And all of a sudden he sees his uncle just fly back like 20, 30 feet in the air, like something knocked him back like 20, 30 feet. And my dad runs over, he's checking on my dad's uncle, and he just looks like, wow, he looks confused because he just got hit with something. And my dad noticed like a big red mark on his forehead, and he goes, what happened? What's going on? He was like, if I tell you this, you can't tell anyone. This is between me and you. So my dad's uncle goes, he was praying to the Devi Kali, please bring my daughter back. Please bring my daughter back. And then he just heard a voice that said, I give life not so you can take life. And then he just got kicked in his head, and he just flew back 20, 30 feet. And he was just in a daze and dazzled. So this is just one of the Kali stories from Trinidad, and there's a few. That's not something to be messed around with or taken lightly. So I thought that was a really interesting story that my dad told me. And another very popular temple in the South, a Kali temple, big following and whatnot. The head pujari, one day he just committed suicide with a shotgun, and he was very beloved in the village and everything, and he was doing Sada as best as everyone knew. He wasn't into like the black magic part, and it always confused me a little bit. I was like, wait a minute, this gentleman was not doing any black magic or anything, as best as I'm aware of, right? And what made him commit suicide? So that was just some Kali stories from Trinidad, which is a very powerful goddess, and definitely not something to be play around with lightly. And I just want to draw parallels in the Western tradition. I was following the teachings of this really high-ranking Kabbalist. He's a Jewish mystic, and then he shared with me that one of the highest, the highest, what is it? What would he say? One of the arcanorums in his tradition was related to Kali, and it was Kali's mantra, her true mantra, tantra, and yantra. So for the listeners, mantra is sound, and tantra is the practice, and yantra is the geometry, the mandalas, and everything. So it's the practice from the sound and the image, the correct, all that correct stuff, and that really took me back. I was like, wait a minute, this guy's a really high-ranking Kabbalist, and they practice Tantra. And then I went down a rabbit hole with in India, the Jewish influence in India. I had no idea how many different times there were Jewish migrations to India as early as the times of Solomon, right? So there's at least 6 or 7 groups. Just for the viewers, just not for the listeners, please excuse me. I don't have my full notes here, so I'm just winging most of this from memory. But there's 6 or 7 groups in India that are there, and I always found that interesting because, throughout history, the Jews have been kicked out of over 109 countries, over 1,000 times. And I always found it interesting. They were never kicked out of India, right? So they had a firm foundation there. And then there's so many similarities between some of the groups, like the Sikhs. If you know who the Sikhs are with the turbans, very, very similar tribes, because both of them are very, they're very loyal to their tribes. The Sikhs and Jews don't usually marry outside or intermingle much. They're good with business. They grow their hair. And there's just so many similarities I picked up on, and right down to, with the Old Testament, you have, Abraham and Sarah, and in the Eastern tradition with Hinduism, you have Brahma and Saraswati, right? So that's like there's so many parallels with some of the words. One word is Pardesi, which is paradise, and I don't have the Hebrew name for it, but it's an acronym. In Kabbalah, each of the letters stands for another word. And you got to excuse me again, I don't have my full notes, but that's one of the most interesting rabbit holes I went down with some of the letter mysticism and the.
I do think that is. I'm glad you're bringing that up. Just real quick, I hate to interrupt. Is that like that
Go
does
ahead.
that even like I really feels like that really even screws up Gematria and all that stuff more. Is that like now if you want to say hey Aleph, but now you got to add all those. You're actually using other letters to explain one letter. Mm-hmm. And then you can start mind fucking the hell out of that.
I don't have my notes right now, but I went down that rabbit hole, and there's a very interesting and precise science to it that I picked up on. And side note, I'm not happy with how Gematria is used nowadays. I think it's just what I call confirmation bias. You'll have conspiracy theorists, especially, they'll find they'll find a code number 47, and then they'll use the Enochian Gematria or some Gematria that has nothing to do with the original word or the language. I always found interesting that it's just confirmation bias. They'll just plug it into whatever Gematria system that adheres to their numeric correspondence that they're trying to go after. So
there's a problem with some sites. It's like you could have you probably literally have 12 ciphers you're running it through, and it's like at that point, are you going to find what you're looking for anyway?
Yeah, exactly.
I understand what you're getting at. I do think even myself when it comes to Gematria, in some ways I've kind of calmed down using it in some ways and look at it differently. But like even myself, I really don't kind of really put too much push on it or think it's that important unless it's like you see it fitting in with like everything else to where it makes complete sense. You know what I'm saying? Almost where I'm like using it again like polymaths would. It's one part of everything else. You know what I'm saying? I try to use it that
Yeah,
way.
indeed. So we talked a little bit about the Kali tradition.
Sorry,
which I
sorry,
found-
sorry, Absidarian. Let
Go
me
ahead,
jump in
Jin.
here really quick.
Go
Sorry
for
about
it,
that.
please.
Okay.
No.
So I just want to shout out a show that Nick and I did a million years ago. We did the Tantra and Kabbalah series. So we compared the 10 Mahavidyas, exactly like what you're talking about, to the 10 Sephiroth on the tree. And I gave like my reasoning of why they would go there. And I used mostly the Sephirotic, the Exoratic, astrology to argue why that I thought that would be the place. Or why that would be the case, excuse me. And so I totally agree with you. I think that Kali is a very dangerous goddess. It's very powerful. It's a destruction of time. I said that she was like, I likened her to maybe the seventh density, if you want to call it that, of Binah, and how she is like she stands upon the corpse of time. She is like the destruction of all things, but it's also the densifying of all things, because gravity sort of brings you into formation. So everything, it's like the same as Krishna worship. Like Krishna and Kali have that kind of very close relationship, especially in Bengal. So I'm really glad that you brought up like the diaspora Jews in India, because like the Cochin Jews were around the Calcutta temple. They were around all this stuff. So in the 10th and 11th century, when the Todala Tantra was being written and when all this stuff was like happening, yeah, there were groups who did know traditional Jewish Kabbalah that were there. So it makes sense. And I've posited that even though the ordering in the Todala Tantra is different than the tree, it's not that the Sephira are in different places. It's that the light travels through in a specific way. And so that's how they've mapped it out. Just as like there's a lightning path and a serpent path, and there's like different ways to cross the tree using those formulas. So I think that it perfectly comes together. It's like there's already Tantra is a synthesis, and something that Nick said was, I was like, yeah, Nick, that's Tantra. That's like what it is. It's like putting it all kind of together and like seeing it as a greater whole. And so, I agree with that. And Kali is very popular among all of them. And so it's really interesting because in Indonesia, there is no Kali. She is just Durga, but she looks like Kali. So she will be black and she will be ferocious and she will have the lolling tongue, which is the
I've seen
usual
that. Yeah. Oh
symbol.
shit. Okay. I assumed there was a difference, or something was going on, but I know what you're talking about, and they do look exactly the same to me.
So there's the thing is like it all depends on like the story, the text. So if you're like the Indonesians never received the Kali Tantras. So everything that they had received was pre those tantras being written. So their practices are caught in a different time, you could say. Just like Trinidad has like they preference Kali, but in Buddhism we preference a different Mahavidya or a different wisdom goddess. So everybody has kind of like their framework that they use and their kind of like beginning, ending, terminus. That's sort of how I've been thinking about it. I don't know, maybe that's a little too speculative magical theory, but I think that there is something that different places, when they receive the text, if they continue to practice it in the same way, it's interesting to look at how it changes, exactly like how we're talking about from island to island, from place to place, because you would think of India as being the origination, which it is. But then in India, they did not maintain the sampradayas. Like the tantric sampradayas there's very few of them left in India. There are tantric temples, but there's very few tantric sampradayas, like schools that practice, like a mystery school that practices tantra. So I just think it's interesting how they have preserved this stream of it, maybe better than in India, and then they've also preferenced like a particular goddess. I don't know. Just some observations.
Great feedback. I just want to touch on you mentioned Buddhism. Yes, so Buddhism, they follow Tara, the green Tara, and in India, the 10 Mahavidyas, Tara is the second Mahavidya, which is another expansion of Kali. And yes, Durga is related to Kali. Kali is the black aspect of Durga. So the Black Mother, that's a very ancient archetype, a Black Mother, right? The Black Madonna. And I just want to recommend a really good book if you're interested in this. It's David Kingsley, Tantric Visions of the Divine Feminine, the 10 Mahavidyas. And when I was younger, learning about esoteric Hinduism, I was really blown away by David Kingsley's work. I got to give him a lot of credit. He really does justice to that tradition. And of course, you guys probably know Mike McGee, the magician. He has the Shiva Shakti website also, and he brought a lot of the Tantra to the West with his translations, his original translations from a lot of the Tantras. So Mike McGee, his website, I think, is shivashakti.org or Shiva Shakti, something like that, but I'll bring it up later. And David Kingsley, great author. Jin mentioned the tree, and I definitely want to circle back to what I was saying with Paradise, and you guys will love this esoteric breakdown. The word paradise is related to the Hebrew word pardes, which is also in Sanskrit and Hindi's pardesi, which means orchid or garden. It is also notarikon, or an acronym for Peshet, Remez, Derush, Sad. These are Hebrew terms for Peshet. These are the Hebrew terms for each of the letters now, right? Peshet is the literal meaning passed on by religious tradition. Remez is the second letter, allegorical meaning. The third letter, Derush, homiletical meaning, which is the application of the general principles of rhetoric to the specific art of public speaking. And the fourth is Sad, which is the mystery or the secret meaning. So there's 4 layers. And when you use the Kabbalistic key, you could break down language and a lot of different correspondence with this. When we talk about the 4 Kabbalistic worlds, they relate to these meanings. Although some faiths do not utilize the Sad or esoteric hidden meaning, most still use the first 3. If one grasps the first 3, it is much easier to steer them towards Sad, the mystery. So I thought that was a great connection there. Okay, so we talked about Kali.
Yeah, Notarikon, I think, just want to interrupt real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
I know we covered it in, I think, our ciphers and scripts in Gematria, but Notarikon is like a form of Gematria. Right? I think you said, every single letter, stands for something.
Yeah, really interesting science. Okay,
sorry, before we do, sorry, Lisa.
Go for it. Please do.
Oh, okay. So I just want to say, before we get off Kali, I just want to say maybe 2 things, quick things. Is that, Green Tara, definitely, I said that she was a Chesed. So you have that sort of infinite blue-green ray of mercy, infinite in the world, in potential. But, there are all the Mahavidya goddesses in their own way actually appear in Tantric Buddhism as well. So all of those, they just appear as Dakinis, because they came originally from that Choseth Yogini 64 set, which was not really Hindu. It wasn't Puranic and it wasn't Buddhist. It was just Tantric. So you had all the different practitioners around. So Chinnamastika is actually a Buddhist goddess rather than a Indian Tantric goddess. So I just want to point that out. But absolutely, I totally agree with that. If you are Kali Kolis, meaning that your preference is Kali as the prime mover, so the number 1, exactly like Abstarian said, then you are going to view the tree as an emanation out of her, which also makes sense in a Christian way, if you want to think of it, like you're coming through the 3, like through Binah. So you're just saying that time is the first, or the destruction of time is the prime mover in the world. I think anyone who has familiarity with the Kabbalistic tree could say that that's a possibility. So, I think that's really interesting.
Great feedback. Did you want to say something, Lisa?
Yeah, I was going to say, sorry, Nick, everything Jen said, and then Nick said something. I was like, oh, wait, because you brought up that we did an episode on Gematria and how it's utilized by the different tenets, like Greek, and then Spanish, and then Jewish, and you have all these emanations coming out from it. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I apologize if this is wrong, but isn't a lot of some of the Gematric practices used to formulate magic squares, or is that in
The magic squares would be going by the value of the letters would be going by how it is in Gematria, yeah.
Okay, and then you had said something about shaping energy
Well, or
from
you
the
could
words.
use just real quick. You can use Pythagorean too as well, but I mean, most people I know attribute Hebrew to the magic squares.
Sorry Lisa, sorry Nick, there is a tantric thing Avstarian mentioned at Yantra building, so that does use the Pythagorean, it's a triangle system, right? It's a system of 64 triangles, but it's really 5 down and 4 up. I think that's right. It might be the other way, but it's one of those ways. And so if you construct it, you use the letters. So you place a bija, a seed syllable, just like a Hebrew letter. You would place them in the specific triangles, and then it would be arranged according to a lunar calendar. So the way that you would order them, going clockwise or counterclockwise, it would depend. It could shift depending on what niche goddess you were worshiping or whatever important festival there was.
And it's something that's used in Sufism, isn't it? Or am I incorrect?
No, you're totally right. And I've been reading a little bit about this. I think they call it Kabbalah, or something. It's a very popular form of Kabbalah for the Golden Dawn, is how I understand. And so it's Islamic. It's not Jewish. I mean, obviously, yes, Jewish origins. Right. But yeah, you're totally right. They have a Islamic letter mysticism, which most normative Muslims actually seem to know a little bit about, or at least understand that it exists.
But to Absidarian's point is that you look at all these different religions, regardless of what they are, their mystic arm or the part of that religion or the mystic one are still using Gematria, are still using these methods to form or to help guide them in their mystic journey. And so when people, and to your point exactly, people are using Gematria and almost bastardizing the entire process when it's actually a very, I guess, methodological type of way to formulate things. I don't know, maybe not, but so.
No, that's a really good point, Lisa, because I think when you and Nick do the shows on the medieval, who's Grimoires. The one that Nick loves, on the Grimoires, but the Michael Myers. So he's talking a lot about ciphers. Nick always talks about Michael Myers, right? So, but he's talking about ciphers all the time. And I think that that's what we've seen in modern occultism, is that they've increased sort of the use of the ciphers. So we're much more familiar with the ciphers they would use in Crowley. We can see there's a little spycraft at play. We may not understand it, but we know it's there. So I think it's become muddied because of how out in the culture it has become. And also our level of awareness, right? We're never able to speak like this at any other time in history than right now. So, like how you were saying before, it's the show, the sort of dialogue that we have as multiple people, we kind of create a polymath in a way for at least an hour and a half, right? So
try.
Hell
yeah.
Yeah, great points. I just wanted to build on what some of your comments with the yantra. So I want to talk about the Shri Yantra, which is the one of the top yantras, and in Tantra, the Shri Yantra it corresponds to one of the Mahavidyas, not Kali, but even more hidden aspect that not too many people are aware of, and some say this is even higher, which is Tripura Sundari, which is she's a 16-year-old Devi. One of her epithets is Sodashi, which means the 16th. So it's a hidden 16th syllable. There's a 15th syllable mantra, and she brings out the full mantra if you're initiated by mouth to air. So it turns the 15 seed mantra into 16. And I always found it interesting, as it corresponds to letters. In my esoteric research, I've found in numerous sources, from Papas to St. Martin, they all claim that the original alphabet had 16 letters. So I always thought that was a really interesting correspondence. And I even drew the Shri Yantra. So I was, years ago, I was just fasting during Navratri, which is the 9 nights for the Devi. So you do fasting and you worship. And during that time, I was really into geometry. And let me tell you, when you draw geometry, that thing comes to life. It's similar. They say, you know, if you have a tarot deck, it's even more powerful if you draw your own tarot deck while fasting. You're going to draw way better cards, and it's going to even better correspondence. So a lot of magicians, part of their training or initiation is you got to draw your own deck, right? So I remember when I was learning a lot about this, I came across this interesting quote. It was, Shiva is Shaiva without Shakti. Shaiva means corpse. So Shiva is Shaiva without Shakti. So that means, you know, the popular icon of Kali standing on Shiva with her tongue out. So there's just so much rich symbolism right there. And I just had a thought while doing this podcast, how, you know, I'm sure there's a connection between the 10 Mahavidyas, and we could map that on the tree with the 10 Sephiroth. I'm sure. I just thought of this right now, but I'm pretty much sure there's a correspondence there, right, with the tree.
It makes sense to me.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, as I argued that there is. I mean, you don't have to follow my way, but I agree. I think that there's a one-to-one relationship between the Shaktis and like maybe a Shekinah layer. Maybe you could say it's like the 7th density of the Sephira. Yeah, absolutely. Like, as I said, Kali and Binah, it makes a lot of sense to me in a tantric way. She's raising the Time King. She's raising Mahakala back into life from his corpse. Just like the example you gave, like Shiva without Shakti is Shava, right? So she's raising his corpse from Shiva into Mahakala, into time, bringing time into the Leela. That makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know, just riffing, I guess.
No, certainly. So,
do you think that sounds a lot like Isis and Osiris?
100%.
Yeah.
Well, can I speak on that? Because I did some research between India and Egypt. You know, both of them really revere the lotus. One, Osiris is really a Shiva figure, right? So I did this meme where Isis is in Egypt. She found all the pieces of Osiris except one, and then the next frame is meanwhile in India, and you have the lingam. So yes, the symbolism between the 14th part of that's missing of Osiris, I correlate that to Shiva's lingam, with the phallic symbol, the creative essence. And in Hinduism, esoteric Hinduism, the tithis are the moon cycles. The 14 is that relates to that, the tithis, which is one of the phases of the moon. So 100% there's a correspondence I see in Egypt and in India. And if you look at Rudolf Steiner's Cosmology, he says that the post-Atlantis civilizations, the first epoch was in India and the second was in Egypt. So, and I always felt that was true with my, my research and everything. But the first epoch in India, we have 0 written records, 0. Anything we have now, those are like the third epoch with the Vedas. That came much later. So before there was no written records and things like that. You just have to go into clairvoyance, the Akashic records, tap into the ether to really find that correspondence. But yeah, I do see a very interesting correspondence between Osiris and Shiva. Very similar symbolism and correspondence. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Right. Yeah, not too crazy.
Also Isis and Tara. So Isis doesn't really relate to Kali, but if you relate Isis to Tara or Uma Tara, meaning that it can cover the identity of her in the Vedas, the Puranas, and the Tantras. Then I think that she corresponds to an Isis figure. Just as Durga can populate the tree using the Nav Durga, right? Like there are different expressions of the goddess depending on where you're saying is the first one. So I think it makes more sense in the comparative like theology, I guess, is to look at Isis and Tara rather than Isis and Kali. So I think that's where like that perspective, like where you prefer Tara as the prime, how close were you to the original story, or how close were you to the Egyptian story? And then different people preference different versions, right?
I would agree with that.
Indeed, Jen. Go
Can
ahead,
I,
Lisa.
Can I mention something? And please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm gonna riff like Jen just said. So the Lotus is extremely popular in, I'm gonna go with Egyptian. And y'all just said Osiris and Isis, and so you have the, what is it, duality, I guess you could say, so to speak, or whatever the opposites, right? And when you look at most of the what's put on walls and what's depicted on the walls in Egypt, you constantly see the lotus or the water lily. You know, I know they're two totally different species, but bear with me. And Jen, please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the lotus and the water lily are protogynous, in that one day they will be, well, they first develop as female, and when a pollinator lands on them, they will close the flower, go all the way into the water, and come back up as a male. And then the pollinator will walk around the flower, pollinating the rest of the area of the flower, and then it will close again, come back down, and then come back up as a female. And then, you know, the whole, you know, pollination begins and what have you. Isn't that true, Jen, or am I mistaken?
No, that's 100% correct. That's why when you see them in Asia, the lotuses will always grow in a colony. Like when you see them in the like any pictures of from Vietnam or India, those grow in a colony, because it's really like only a few plants together, right? It might be multiple expressions, but it's really only maybe 2 or 3 plants in total. So it's always like a colony like that. And so, yeah, you're totally right. And I think that there's even something interesting that you're saying with the there's a hermetic sort of element of like transitioning between genders, right? And so that's also interesting to what Absidarian was saying about Tripura Sundari, because when I did those episodes with Nick, which is, that's a long series, I talked a lot about Tripura Sundari, how she is like in Buddhism, she is kind of very, very important Dakini goddess, and that she is also the expression of the word. So she is the third cause, like if you're using the, to reference what Absidarian said, the Todala Tantra list, Kali's number 1, Tara's number 2, number 3 is Tripura Sundari. So she is the third cause. But there's also another way to read that. So time, as you know, Lisa, as I've said, even between us before, one can never be, one is not a prime number. So one can never really be first cause. So the second cause really is where you start, is perception. But then what is perception without like a container? So what is the container is the word. So you could say that in Sri Vidya, that different school than Kali Kola. So they prefer Tripura Sundari as their sort of like main goddess. And they would say that actually Kali is an expression of her. Just as a Kali Kola would say that she is an expression of Kali. But she has more of a wide range appeal. She's not a dark, she's like she's just vibrant. She's much more vibrant. So it's a different, I would say it's a different polarity almost. It's like a different energy, but it's also talking about the same energy. So I think that's her symbol is the lotus, and the lotus really is the 64 triangles. And so we all notice that most Buddhists, most Indian, especially Shakta goddess cosmology iconography, they will always show a lotus. So some on the pictures with Nick that I showed, where some of them had 11 petals, some of them had 9 petals, some of them had 108 petals. So it really depends on your system, what the text is saying, and then the artist preference. But I think to go with your point about the lotuses, it's kind of like that with language, like about Gematria. It's like there are multiple expressions of the same system, and then maybe over time the system degrades because everybody has sort of forgot how to interpret it in the original way. And I think that's also like what the Pardes is, like the Pardes system is like the pomegranates, right? The garden of pomegranates, or the orchard of pomegranates, both. That's what it is. It's like, are the seeds corrupted? Are the bijas purified? That's what Buddhist Sanskrit is for. So when we do like the Mahavij, like we don't call them the Mahavijas, but when we do those kind of more left-handed rituals for those dakinis or whatever, or goddesses, it's to purify the bijas. So it's just to ritually purify them and make them like pristine again, like the primordial. So that's the difference really between like Buddhism and Hinduism. But there's something really interesting there, I think, like just like how we're looking at different systems changing, evolving, and also localizing. Because I think that's a big part of Gematria, and I think it's a lot of West Indian magic as well. It's like how it's localized to the conditions of different streams of influence.
Which is why there's differences between different islands. Anything else?
Yeah. Sure. So, I just wanted to talk about the Lotus symbolism a little bit that Lisa mentioned. I took a great trip to Egypt years ago. I did a Nile cruise, and you would stop off in all Cairo, Aswan, all the different places. I was just blown away by the, I went in the Great Pyramid, really amazing energy. But the lotus, I noticed there were two flowers that I noticed in a lot of the art and the symbolism. It was actually the lotus and the papyrus I saw a lot. And the papyrus, I learned that it represented Lower Egypt, which was the north, and the lotus was Upper Egypt, which was the south of Egypt. And the lotus, if you know anything about the Egyptians, they spent a lot of time preparing for the afterlife, right? So the lotus had to do with like rebirth and eternity, resurrection, renewal of life. So I always thought that was really interesting. And then I always wanted to do a study between the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Has anyone read any of those two?
Gone through the
Egyptian.
Egyptian.
Oh, Egyptian. Yeah, I've read the Tibetan. I will say this for the Tibetan is that it's an incomplete version of our Bardo book. So yeah, there are parts of it that are real. There are parts of it that were invented for that 70s, new age audience, I guess you could say. But there's real stuff. Like they talk about like the different dakinis you'll see, the 49 nights of the soul traveling through the smoky realm. Yeah, I mean it's very interesting. It's definitely influenced, like Tantra has definitely influenced modern magic. I mean, we see it. We interviewed the guy from Temple of Set the other day, and that's a big part of Temple of Set, right? Like they really love the Evola, the Bhairava Tantras, the Kali Tantras. They're really interested in them. Not that they're necessarily doing exactly what those Tantras say, but they're interested in the ideas. So I think that Tantra is really interesting to look at in the West Indian context because it sort of stayed the same, whereas Tantra sort of it evolved into something else in the other parts of the world. Yeah. There's kind of much more of the tradition of like, oh, it's like you worship this to get rich fast. That's not really what Tantra is for, but that's kind of like that's more maybe a village person's perspective. Like they're going to worship the harder deity. Sorry, Nick.
No, sorry. You were talking. I will say that from my experience in like, I guess the magical community or ceremonial magician community, it doesn't really matter kind of, I guess, like what order or what kind of stuff you'd be into. Tantra seems to be like just like a tool that any magician, no matter what they're practicing, may decide to use one day in their magical thing. It doesn't actually, from just my experience, it doesn't matter like what kind of stuff you're into. It just seems to be something like meditation. Same thing. You know what I'm saying? Or if you're into certain breathing techniques, it's just like almost like a common thing that is just used no matter what you're into.
Well, you know that
almost like tarot.
First, No, you're absolutely true. That's absolutely correct. Like the first guy who wrote the first Tantra in English or translated the first Tantra was Sir John A. Woodruff. He was the governor of Calcutta for 39 years. Interesting number. And his wife was also a Kali Tantrika of the highest, so ninth Marga. So she had gone all the way. He had gone all the way. He was a member of the Golden Dawn. He was also a member of like the Calcutta's Masonic, like whatever thing. They had a huge Masonic temple. So he was obviously crossing systems like way back in like whatever 1805.
Crowley was big into that too.
Yeah, exactly. Because they can see that there's something there, something powerful,
Magical.
like how Sarin was
Universal
saying.
thread.
Right. And like the universal archetypes. So it makes sense, like drawing on the threads that we've been drawing on, like the Mahavijays. Yes, there's an absolute relationship to the Hebrew tree. Absolutely. Like no question about it. Now, whether you want to use mine attributions or, there's other people who've done it, they just put Kali at Kether, which changes the whole nature of the tree, right? I didn't do that because I didn't think that was correct. So I did my own thing like always.
Interesting. Absidarian. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, let me see. We were since we were speaking about Tantra, I just wanted to circle back on that website that you guys should definitely check out if you want to see some really cool information on this subject. Is Mike McGee's site. He's passed away, but it's shivashakti.com. So basically shivashakti.com. It's a great reference. And just want to touch on the some of the origins. It has to do with, from my research, Kashmir Shaivism. So this is around 850 CE. And let me see, what was the name of the founder? Oh man, it's a Gorak. It's a Gorak something. It's slipping me right now. But does anyone know anything about
I've never even heard
that
of this.
stream?
Yeah, so I do know about it, but I paused it a little earlier because Buddhism has it narrates its own history, right? So we say that Tantra came from us, which is obviously all magicians do this, right? They always claim the origin of things. So, but I know exactly what you're talking about. It really arose in Kashmir among the Nath yogis. So Matsendranath being number one, then Goranath being number two. So that's really where the appearance of these kind of non-dual Bhairava Tantra is like a god of day and night. That's one way to think about it. Or time, you could say time and waking time and sleeping time or dreaming time.
Yeah, good connection. Definitely. You hit the nail on the head with the Gorak and the Naat tradition. That was the word I was looking for as well. A very, very interesting stream if you look at the history there. All right, so we talked about the Kali tradition, and I think it's only fair we talk about some of the other islands and some of the similarities in the correspondence. So we talked about in part one Obeah, which is Obeah and Shango is more for Trinidad. So Obeah is basically non-centralized, right? There's not a central canon. And Shango is very similar. I don't know much about it, but it's a very similar local practice. And I'll share a quick story, an Obeah story from my family. I had an uncle on my dad's side. He was born with a spiritual gift, and with sight. And there's a lot of different competing traditions in Trinidad and the West Indies in general, from Obeah, Shango, Tantra. And he was a teenager when he started getting his gift of vision and gift of tongue. And he couldn't handle it. He would trip off every now and then. He'd have like episodes. And the family, they went everywhere for help. They went to the imams, which is Islam. They went to like Christian priests. They went to Hindu pundits. And we found that there were people trying to steal his gift, which is a very common practice, in the villages. If someone knows you have a spiritual gift, they would either try to, bring you down or, take your gift, right? So this was what was happening with my uncle. They were just different people were just trying to take his gift. There's an Obeah man living across the street that would always, do black magic and mess with them. And this Obeah man actually killed my grandfather with alcohol. He came out of the hospital and with some ulcers and stuff in his stomach, and he couldn't drink. And the Obeah man across the street was like, "Hey, let's have a drink for old time's sake," yada yada yada. And we found out that he was just really just trying to do black magic on the family and everything. So after my dad, he was like, "Man, we're taking my my uncle everywhere around. He's not getting help. Let me go to Guyana," because Guyana at the time was known for the buck people. These are like the bush people. The bush, like, they were indigenous. They were they know the land. They're really powerful magicians. And at the time, my dad, he told this great story. He was just he's in the forest. He had to go with a canoe for like miles and miles. And then he met with this female shaman just in the Amazon rainforest, right? And she just smiles when she sees my dad. She's like, "I've been expecting you." So my dad tells her the situation. Everybody's trying to take my uncle's gift. What could we do? We've tried to get help from somewhere, so many places. He keeps tripping off. He's having like psychotic episodes and he's getting violent. And he's like, "Yeah, well, there's the Obeah man is really sending a lot of magic his way. Before I do this, I could reverse it, but you sure you want to reverse it and everything? This is very powerful work, and I'm not sure what'll happen." And he was like, "Yeah." And I forgot what she did. She did something. She did some prayers, and then she threw some nails in the air. And at that time, there's no cell phones or anything like that, right? And then she threw the nails in the air. She did her work or whatever. And then they left. And my dad went back to Trinidad, and he went to his house, and there was a funeral across the street while he was there. He was like, "Oh, the Obeah man passed away while you were in Guyana." And they did the time correspondence. Like, my dad was with the bush lady, the buck lady. She was with them around 9:00 when she threw the nails in the air. My cousins and my aunts and uncle, there's like, "Oh, we heard a big scream from across the street around 9:00." Right? So this guy passed away, and then a few months later, his house burned down and whatnot. And then my uncle calmed down. He was like normal with the parentheses. He still had his vision and whatever. But my dad, a couple of months later, he went back to Guyana because he would go to Guyana. He had family over there. And he just went to the lady to thank her. And she passed away because it was just such powerful, when you kick back magic, sometimes it goes back to you. And but my dad's a better storyteller. I don't have the notes, but man, what a story he told me with this whole ordeal with this happening. And real quick, while we're on the subject of Guyana, I had an uncle who also very spiritual gifted, and his in-laws were in Guyana, and they invited him to Guyana, and they were Kali devotees, right? But they were doing the black magic Kali, and they were keeping him up every night. They were just keeping him up. He just wasn't able to go to sleep, and to try to go to sleep, and then they would take him to these Kali pujas and offerings and whatnot. And he after a while he realized something's wrong. I'm not sleeping. I'm on edge. Let me get out of here. And then when he went back to Trinidad, he was on the Christian side. So the priest came. They did an exorcism on him. And my cousins were on the road, and they were just seeing like spirits coming out of my uncle, and they counted like 21, you've seen shadows, you've seen like light balls. And I just wanted to tell another Kali story on the darker side, because there's a lot of black magic, and Guyana is known for the Kali magic, and it's really powerful what they do, but they do a lot on the black magic side. So I thought that was a very interesting connection there. But
Absolutely. Let's touch on. Sorry, I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt you. But I want to touch on Our Lady of Saparia. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that story, but I think it's a very illustrative and really important and interesting shrine. So it is one of the only Black Madonnas of the Americas. It's in Trinidad. It's at a small church called Our Lady of Saparia, but she has another name, Sapari Mai. So she is also considered an emanation of Kali, but she's also considered an emanation of Guan Yin, and she's also considered a more Khmer figure among some of the Obeah people or the Shango people who also visit the shrine. So you have Catholics, ostensibly Taoist, ethnic Chinese people, you have Obeah people, and you have Hindus all worshiping the same figure. They all have slightly different names, but interrelated names, and it is supposedly the site of miracles, and it is the statue is supposedly self-arising, as they found it miraculously in a cave in a mountain, is how I believe, it's, if I remember, or it came from the ocean. I can't remember the exact story, but it's one of the two. So I think she's really interesting, and she is very dark-skinned among the Marys, so, and like visibly ethnic, but not, it's not black. It's kind of like a Black Madonna thing. So I don't know. It's interesting.
Thank you very much. So.
yeah, definitely interesting connection with the Black Madonna. So I think it's only fair we touch base with some of the other islands. I'm not too familiar with like Voodoo. Are you guys? Do you guys know anything that you guys want to share about Voodoo before I just give some information?
Yeah, I'll do a little thing about Voodoo. I think it's I think there's we've talked about it a little bit with JJ and Nick, and on some of the other shows, and certainly the show on DeLorean's company. But I think Voodoo, people tend to think that it's all over the islands, whereas Voodoo is much more localized. Like, yes, there's influences, obviously Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, all that, but I think that it's much more focused on Haiti, and then obviously Miami and New York because of the diaspora. So, but I think Voodoo is interesting. I think that what you said about the Shango, they remind me a lot of Zoroastrianism. So I've always found that very interesting. They focus on the 7 main orishas, the 7 sort of like rays of the one God. Something interesting about that. And then, but then to tie it into Voodoo, well, Voodoo is obviously slightly different than Santeria because it comes from 2 different places in Africa. Voodoo has more of a Dahomean origin, and they say that Santeria has more of a Yoruban origin. But I think that you can make a case also that it's a lot more intermixed and a lot more indigenous and a lot more European. It's sort of all 3 things at the same time. That's my opinion. So Voodoo is no real difference than maybe like 17th century masonry with like some hellfire rites. They just, it just looks a little different, but it's there. I think there's something that is understandable and very. I think it influenced a lot of people, as I've referenced on the show, like before, like the Haitian Gnostic Handbook by Michael Berthiaud. That was one of my first like left-handed grimoires I ever read, and he I don't know if he's really into voodoo or what that whole weird coven was doing, but he's definitely drawing ideas. So I think that there are some like really interesting ideas with the sigils. I know you brought that up, Absadarian. So yeah, I'll let you go. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. That was great feedback that you shared. Great breakdown and introduction. I'll build upon that. There's the visual symbols of voodoo. I hope I'm pronouncing it. Is it Veve or Veve?
Yeah, that's right.
The visual symbols, and just to expand upon what you're saying with the European influence, I found this nugget really interesting. I was researching Martinez de Pasquale, who's an early Martinist, and he started the Eloise Cohens, which was the order of Knight Masons, the elect priests of the universe. So they were known for doing a lot of ritual work, a lot, like daily, hours and hours of ritual work, really heavy stuff. And Martinez de Pasquale, he died, I think he died in Hispaniola, an island between Cuba and Puerto Rico, the Greater Antilles of the Caribbean. I'm not sure, but somewhere around there. I always found it interesting that, you know, he passed away over there. And after that, the Eloise Cohen tradition just fell apart. And, you know, they didn't have all the information. They weren't initiated into the higher rites. Fast forward to the present time, there was a little rebirth with this movement, with the OMS. It was a Martinist group. And there was this really interesting blog called The Three Luminaries. It was one of the writers was Paul Edward Rana. Very interesting character. I've seen his interviews, and really upstanding gentleman. He was really brilliant mind. He was dedicated. He was well loved, and he passed away in 2023. It was a suicide, a self-inflicted gunshot wound. They say it was an accident. You know, he was just playing around. I don't know the details, but I bring that up because he, towards the end, he went full Christian, and he left the OMS and the Martinist teachings and all occult work, all that ritual work aside. And on the Three Luminaries, he talked about his journey, and that, you know, he researched, you know, the symbolism, and he found that, you know, he was not a fan of Martinez de Pasquale at the end. And he compared some of the higher teachings that they had, you know, evidence of, like the veve, the visual symbols of voodoo. So I thought that was a really interesting connection between, you know, European tradition and the West Indian tradition, how much influence the islands had on Europe at the time, the 1700s. And that was a very interesting rabbit hole going down. Does anyone know anything about any of those subjects, or they want to?
I mean, I've heard of Martinism before, but I had no idea that any of that was in. I didn't know anybody was in it, but I've heard of them.
Yeah.
What about you, Jim?
This makes a lot of sense to me. Sorry, Nick. This makes a lot of sense to me because of what we've been talking about with Heidi. But then also because if you look at the composition, Anglophone islands are usually Anglican, or like British colonial islands, right? So they would have the influence of both the low and high Anglicanism. So that would obviously affect the framework of the quote unquote folk magic in it. So like Haiti, it's French Catholic ostensibly. So you would use that Rosicrucian framework then, or that French blue pillar, whatever that is. JJ's not here, I'm sorry. So, but that blue pillar masonry, whatever the French people were doing, that's what they would use. So you can tell there's like slight variations, and I don't know enough. Excuse me. I don't know enough about the Martinists to make like even a Kabbalistic judgment on like what they were doing or what they were thinking about. But just from what I understand, that seems to be a lot more pervasive than I think a lot of people talk about, and that it seems to be like an undercurrent within, especially because we all speak English as our primary language, but in Anglophone occultism that very few people do discuss.
I like that.
Yeah, great build, Jen. So yeah, I thought that was a very interesting connection, and just, you know, I don't know much about the voodoo tradition, but it seems there's like a little resurgence of it, because some parts of where I'm at, you know, near the water, I'll be driving by around, you know, around the full moon or the new moon. I'm seeing, you know, people in white in the water. You know, I don't know what they're doing, but yeah, they've actually found chickens and stuff, so I do know what they're doing. But yeah, there seems to be a little resurgence of that, especially like you said, Miami's a big hub, Los Angeles and New York. But what I learned also, there's just so much ceremonial magic being done in the United States, and it's related to voodoo.
Oh yeah,
So I just
could
thought
tell
that
you
was
for sure.
very interesting.
A lot of root work and a lot of incense. No, not even so much that, like tinctures or taking herbs and sticking them into like oils or whatever. Basically, root work, kind of still the same thing. That's used a lot. Like I've even said myself, depending on because I was big into I guess I was into herbs and oils. There was times where I would actually take voodoo, I guess, recipes and incorporate that into my ceremonial magic, my rituals, even though I'm not necessarily practicing voodoo. If there was a way that I could look at it and align it with what I was aiming for, like, if I was using a certain sphere on the tree, if I could figure out maybe if that kind of, I might be using that same type of thing with these, herbs and oils, I would incorporate maybe like, something from voodoo, like a voodoo recipe in a sense, for a spell. And I know a lot of people that did that. There was, I forgot the name of it, but there was even like some book that had like voodoo stuff like that in it. It was kind of like real easy to read. That was like rather well known, that went around the magical community. People would use the spells and stuff. But like, again, I mean, yeah, I guess if you're a thelemic magician, you're going to look at different practices and try to figure out a way to, I guess, align it Kabbalistically to use it yourself. So, but I did that with voodoo at times. Long story short. And I know plenty of people who have. And another thing, I did want to bring up, maybe we can end with this question. Hopefully, I mean, it's kind of a deep question, but maybe we can summarize it rather quick. Hoodoo and voodoo. I don't know if we kind of went on about this in the first one, but like, what would be the difference to you, Absidarian? Because in my opinion, I have heard that there's differences in it, and that I do think that there kind of is as well. I do think that one of them might actually adhere more to a pantheon than the other one. What do you think, Absidarian?
Very good question.
Yeah. If you don't mind me putting you on the spot there.
No, that's fine. I'm not too familiar with hoodoo, but I could still speak on it. I know voodoo, the practice is, centered around, the West African tradition. But from what I understand, hoodoo is just decentralized. It has no organized priesthood or structure. And it's like somewhat of like a mismatch of different practices. But unfortunately, I really don't know much about it.
Gotcha. Actually, that's one thing. There was I was correct on the voodoo book, but there's one thing that I will say is that most of the stuff actually that I did use probably would have fell under hoodoo. To tell you the truth. But Jin, you got any ideas on that?
Sure, I'll try and keep it concise, boss. Okay. Hoodoo is basically American South. Yes, there is an overlapping influence, but with voodoo, but voodoo is much more, as I said, localized to Haiti. And hoodoo also utilizes the Protestant, exactly what we were talking about. Like, it utilizes that Protestant idea. In fact, there's a movie, Skeleton Key. I think they remade it. I've never seen the remake, but there's an original. And I think it might actually be like a triplet, like a remade 3 times. But anyways, there's one from the early 2000s. It has a lot of real hoodoo in it. If you're interested in how that works, I suggest you go watch that movie. There's even a Saint Expedite statue in that film that's very prominent. Saint Expedite's very important, even among Protestant hoodoo practitioners. So, because he can represent a crossroads man in some ways of thinking. So that's that. And so hoodoo utilizes basically everything. The people who were running what they would call pharmacies in the 1940s were all Jewish. So then they started incorporating not just root work, but they started incorporating like Psalms, Kabbalah, the Anariva books, all of that tarot. Like, it sort of was the genesis of what root work has become now. So that's kind of like Obeah. It's kind of like Jamaican kind of magic. Like, there is a Congolese element. There's an element of like working with the dead, spirits of the dead, controlling ghosts. Maybe not to the same ritual degree. I know you guys did the show on Adolfo Constanzo, I want to call him.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Very close to that. Yeah.
There's an element of what as him as like whatever. I know he was like a Satanist or whatever, but like the whatever Polero he said he was doing, there's an element of that is somewhat similar to what they are doing in Obeah sometimes and Hoodoo sometimes, but maybe not to the advanced. Like I don't think that they've maintained the tradition. It's not like some pristine African idea. So it's like a little degraded. It's a little more black magic-y. It's a little folk magic-y. That's not bad, or it does not make any judgment. So then voodoo is just adheres to the strict, maybe the cosmology is stricter. So there's one God, though it is monotheistic, but he's unseen, unheard. I think that's a big part of it. And he can only really be expressed in a Trinitarian idea. So like the triangle with the eye. And then his main emanation on Earth is Damballa. So if you've seen Chucky, you've heard that. Damballa does not do that. In fact, he does not grant gross magical powers. It's for healing and great works, I guess, in the world, like very powerful. So in different houses, syncretize saints differently. So I know this has been a lot. People get very bothered by the syncretism, but the syncretism to me actually follows quite a logical pattern for the most part. Like why you would align certain saints with certain spirits, and it's not really a mask or a cover. I think it actually relates a lot more to the Kabbalistic ideas or to the metaphysics of the actual spirit, rather than, I don't think it's a cover up. I think it's just
hermetic,
using something. Yeah, you're exactly
almost
hermetic principles.
You're pulling
100%.
different ideas to represent the same thing. Yeah. You know, one thing I was thinking that I did even want to add to, maybe in a way that I should have said before with the hoodoo and voodoo. I think more or less like the way I looked at it is that, let's say I used like, you know, some root recipe, and I was putting, you know, herbs and oils and all this stuff in there for some purpose. You know, voodoo, I'd be using it specifically, let's say Papa Legba. But now I'm going to use it for like Elohim Sabaoth. So now it's like, you know, now it's like probably hoodoo because it's not being specific to a pantheon. You know what I'm saying? But you're still trying to use that idea. I think like that could even be like another way to maybe explain the differences. It's more of like maybe like the magical practice and not an actual set to those gods. I don't know.
No, I agree with that, and I attributed El Ab to him. So that's really funny that you say that, Nick. But no, I agree. I 100% agree.
Nice. All right. I think we'll wrap it up here. I think we got a lot in, and plus our man's got to go. He's got important places to be. So thank you, Absidarian, for even squeezing in the time. I appreciate it. Real quick, Jen, do you want to plug your show real fast before we wrap this up again?
Sure. Thank you guys, Nick, Lisa, Absidarian. Amazing, really cool show, as always. Follow me at Wukong Reborn. My link tree's in the bottom. Threshold Saints, Drizzle from Grand Theft Radio just dropped, and that's it. And we have lots more coming up. Lots.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I always appreciate you joining us. Lisa, thank you very much again. I really appreciate you joining us tonight. Hope you had a good time. Yes. Yes. And Absidarian, please let all the listeners know where they can find your work.
Yes, thank you. I got a minute or two real quick, but I'm glad you mentioned Papa Legba, because I did want to speak about him, because it's a really interesting theme to me. Well, first off, for the listeners, in Voodoo, the Loas are the major divine beings, intermediaries between man and, you know, the other realm. So Papa Legba is the Loa associated with the crossroads. He serves as an intermediary between man and the spirit world. So this reminds me of Hermes, right? And also in Obeah, the Obeah man, the medicine man, is, you know, a bridge between the spiritual and physical realms. And in Hinduism, you have Ganesh, which is the Mercury archetype. And in Hindu rituals, it's usually you start with Ganesh to open things up. So I think that's a really good connection there. And, you know, deals with hermetic principles. So really interesting themes, how to bridge the physical and the spiritual. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, everyone, for having me on again. You can find me on Linktree at Absidarian. Peace.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Absidaria. And just to even add to that, the way you explained Papa Legba, I even chose Elohim Sabaoth because he falls on Hod, which would be where Mercury and Hermes and Thoth and the messengers of the gods would fall. So there was even a correlation there. Thank you very much. I appreciate it again. If you want to check out Jinn stuff, you want to check out Obsidarian stuff, and you want to check out occultresearchinstitute.org, the links are in the bottom. Thank you all again, and until the next one, everybody be well. Later.